Michael Robert Knight. I was born in 1987 on July 5th. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 2005 to 2011. The highest rank was Sergeant, E5, and I held multiple positions. I joined the military right out of high school. My mother had passed away a year before high school graduation, and I found myself kind of spiraling, didn't know what to do. I didn't have good grades to go to college. I have 5 brothers. There's no way my stepdad could afford to send us to college. So the military was my best option. And I had a friend who joined the Marine Corps. And he said it was really hard, but it was really rewarding. He had joined a year before me. And so I kind of followed in his footsteps.
What was your experience like entering boot camp and starting off figuring out what the military was going to be like?
Well, I had no idea what to expect other than like the few, minutes I exchanged with my friend. But it was an entirely new world of structure, discipline, and strenuous physical activity. So I went to boot camp in San Diego, California, which is probably one of the nicest places for basic training. Little rain, sunshine, but that also means that they can make you run all day, every day, kind of whenever they want.
Why did you select the Marines?
I heard it was the hardest boot camp, and there's always been kind of a cultural, what would you say, norm that the Marines got stuff done with the littlest resources. And so I felt like I should probably do that if I wanted to better myself, because that was the whole purpose of joining, was to better my situation and transform myself.
What did you do as right after boot camp? What was the start of your career in the Marines?
Right, so boot camp's 3 months. I was there November, December, January, and then as soon as you finish that, you go to either infantry school or which is 3 months, but there's another shorter version that's only 1 month long for people that aren't combat arms. If you didn't know, there's only 10% of the military is combat arms. 90% of it is support positions. And so after I did that 1 extra month of more, it's kind of a basic combat training course. They call it MCT. Then I went to a specialized school for a whole year to learn electronics repair. So I got kind of made fun of by all the combat arms guys in boot camp because I was taking a nerdy job because I was going into repair electronics. But I thought I'd like to learn something interesting that can be useful after the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps wasn't my end all game.
And where did you work during that time as an electronic specialist?
Okay, so the training for electronics is in Pensacola, Florida. That's about a year long. And then I went to a short 2 or 3 month school in Virginia Beach to learn some specific test equipment. And then after that, I was stationed in North Carolina, and I worked on the EA-6B Prowler. It's an electronic warfare jet that the Marines use. And so I worked on that for about a year, and then my job went away. MOS got canceled. They didn't need it anymore. The technology was outdated. And so I got transferred to work at the swimming pool as an instructor. So I got to actually test and train Marines in water survival skills for about a year and a half.
What did you enjoy about those 2 different experiences? What did you not enjoy about those 2 different experiences?
Well, they're completely different things. I really enjoyed the technical stuff, solving problems. Something comes in that wasn't working on the jet, and you got to figure out why it's not working, make it work, and then send it back out. And once you finish your repair, then it has to be checked by a quality assurance representative within your workspace, usually somebody who's a higher rank than you, and then it's safe for flight after that. I really enjoyed that whole process of fixing something that was broken and then seeing it go back in and perform the mission. Water survival training was a really unique experience for me. I'd never really been much of a swimmer other than recreationally, but it was the best shape I ever got in. I would, you could swim a couple miles. And that was also really enjoyable because you got to see these people come in who maybe came from inner cities and had never been introduced to swimming pools or the ocean or anything. And you really had to teach them from the ground up, like teaching a child. Like sometimes you have to push them in the water, just like sometimes you have to throw little kids in the water. But these are grown adults, and I'm not a very large person, and lots of times they're bigger than me. And so it can be kind of intimidating, but you gotta get them past that fear of the water and teach them how to survive in the water in case there's ever an accident when they're on a mission.
What kind of relationships did you build with other people and maybe with some of your superiors during that time?
Well, that's probably the most unique thing about the military is everybody is from somewhere different in the country, or even Puerto Rico, Guam. I served with people from both those places. And so you really get your eyes opened on how diverse this country really is. And then you're all kind of stuck in the same situation, and you all go through hardships together, and you form bonds with people you never would have expected to be your best friends. It's a really unifying experience. And I try and emphasize that with any young person who kind of feels lost and doesn't know what to do when they're leaving high school. It's like the military is a great option to kind of expand that perspective. I made some really good friends, and I'm still friends with them to this day. It's probably the closest I've ever been to peers. I've never worked a job where like we've been as tight knit as in the military. You can talk about anything. You do everything together at work, outside of work. You live together, usually 3 people in one room in the barracks.
What was going on when you were initially scheduled to separate, and why didn't that happen as planned?
Right. So I was supposed to get out in 2010. I had a 5-year contract, but my separation date ended up lying in this span of time where my unit was going to deploy to Afghanistan. And so I didn't get to deploy at all before that because my job had gone away, so I never got to deploy with that unit. And then I worked at the pool for a while, and then I transferred to San Diego to work on an F-18 squadron, which is kind of what my old job got converted into, a newer technology. So I wanted to experience a deployment. I wasn't afraid of it. So I extended my contract by 6 months so I could go on that deployment and see the whole thing through and then come back. And then I got out right after the next year.
What did you experience during that deployment to Afghanistan?
Oh, right. Well, it was really unique. I had never been outside of the United States besides Mexico. And so just starting off, it was kind of crazy. We loaded on planes in Southern California, flew to Baltimore. This was commercial planes. And because we were carrying weapons, we weren't allowed to get off the plane at all. So we had to sit inside the plane for an hour, hour and a half. We couldn't get off and walk around or anything. And then we had to fly straight from there across the Atlantic to Norway. And we were allowed to actually get off the plane there into the terminal, but they also had the terminal locked down, so we had it isolated to ourselves. But still, that was my first time ever sitting on an airplane for almost 2 days straight. That was kind of a bad start to the trip. But after that, it started to get exciting. We flew into Kandahar, or not Kandahar, Kyrgyzstan, which is like a really close to Afghanistan, and there's a big Air Force base there. And so you kind of get to mingle with a bunch of other units who are either going into country or going out of country, trade stories, hear what they have to say. There's a lot of kind of buzzing around, and then we got into country and we had to sleep in a big tent on cots. And like our second night there was a huge sandstorm. So that was a good welcome. And that actually happened to be the only bad sandstorm during the whole 8 months. But it was a really good experience because I was going with a bunch of my friends. We had worked together for a year before that. Most of us, it was our first time in Afghanistan. And, we lived together, showered together, walked to work together, worked together. We worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 7 days a week, the whole time. So you really did have a lot of free time to kind of sit around and think. So it went by really fast, surprisingly fast. But it was really hot, really dusty. Periodically there was insurgents firing rockets at our base. So they sound a little alarm and you kind of have to take shelter. But other than that, we didn't really leave the wire other than flying on C-130s between other bases to drop off classified equipment. So, I mean, it wasn't entirely stressful or traumatic at the time. However, when you'd walk to work, there's a sign outside the kind of command center that would tell everybody confirmed kills from the F-18 squadron. And the whole time we're there, just watching it go up. And by the time we left, there was over 1,000. And so that's kind of a background kind of trauma. Thinking about it as we're leaving and after the fact, it's like, wow, that's a lot of people. How many innocent people were included in that? Because we're dropping big bombs. So that's probably the one thing that bothers me the most about it.
What was the very tail end of that deployment and returning home like for you?
Well, that was really exciting. We barely had internet access out there. I tried to Skype some family members once or twice, and it was not a good enough connection to really have a meaningful conversation. So you kind of felt isolated. And so like the weeks lead, you don't really know the exact return date. They kind of keep that a secret until it's about to happen. But it was a really exciting feeling to like go back to the real world. Like you can eat normal food again. You can sleep in your own bed. You don't smell like BO and dirt all day. When I got back, I just threw away all my clothes and I just wore stuff that I didn't bring because it just, you can't get the stink out. You sweat a lot and you're dirty the whole time. But my friends and I, we were all real excited to come back. We had kind of experienced this, 8-month isolation together, missing all our friends and families, girlfriends, wives, even kids. And I think everyone was really excited to come home, and I don't think anyone thought it was a bad trip. I don't think anyone regretted it. I think in terms of deployments go, we had it pretty good. I think my unit has probably only lost one Marine over there. I mean, we're an avionics support unit. In the deployment that replaced us, there was an insurgent attack that broke through the perimeter, and they did kill one of our Marines in our unit, but I think that's historically the only person we lost, which is pretty good.
How long between returning to the States after that deployment and was your separation?
Well, so we got back around Thanksgiving, right after Thanksgiving, early December, and then I separated in January. So I got back and it was probably about 30 days. So I got back, I did the transitioning classes, which is like a week or two long. They kind of talk about, building a resume, using GI Bill benefits, getting all your stuff handled to the VA. So that kind of took up all my remaining time. My actual separation date wasn't until April, but I had like 3 months of leave saved up, obviously because I was on deployment for the better part of a year and I hadn't really taken leave for a while before that. So I got out early. They let you kind of tack on that leave and leave before your actual separation date. Yeah, and then I just got out and I stayed in San Diego, started community college. I didn't want to stay in. I knew I wanted to go expand my career more than just the military.
What was the biggest shock to you returning to civilian life and attending community college and figuring out what you were going to do with the rest of your life?
freedom. You get to sleep in, you get to exercise when you want, not when someone else tells you to. You get to live wherever you want. You don't have to live in the barracks. um, it's hard to describe, but it's like a completely different world. You get to drive a car wherever you want. You get to hang out with whoever you want. You can pierce your ears if you want. You can grow your hair long if you want. And because I joined when I was 18, like after living under, the boot of my stepdad, he was a great guy, but you have rules as a child, and then you go into the military, and then you have even crazier rules, and then they release you into the wild. And then some people get really lost and they don't know what to do, but education grounded me. And I was like, well, I worked hard while I was in the military. I'm going to continue working hard at education. And so, I mean, I wasn't always the best academic performer, but through each stage of my education, I've improved. My grades have gotten better. Community college, I was getting Bs. When I transferred to university, I was getting A's and B's, and then grad school, I've got almost straight A's.
Where did you go after community college, and why did you make the decision to continue working through education as opposed to some other career options?
Right. So yeah, while I was in community college, I was testing the waters, and I would apply to jobs to see kind of what I was qualified for. Did some interviews with people. I actually got a couple job offers, and I turned them down because I knew it would distract me from finishing my education, and I wanted to use the GI Bill. It's a fantastic benefit. I have a lot of friends who, even my father's still paying off student loans in his 60s. So I've worked at a company I worked full-time at a company and went to community college part-time for the better part of a year, kind of like sophomore year level classes. And that got me really interested in science. It was a materials characterization instrumentation company called Quantum Design in San Diego, and we made superconducting magnets and temperature control systems to measure materials properties. And I worked with a lot of really smart physicists and engineers, and that definitely grounded the idea that I need to continue my education, learn the kind of knowledge they have so I can work on really cool stuff. And so I transferred to University of California, Santa Barbara after 3 years at community college, and finished my bachelor's in physics there. And while I was there, I also did undergrad research the whole time in the materials department.
Why did you decide to continue working into grad school and continue working in academia as opposed to just traditional education?
Right. So a lot of folks finish their bachelor's and then go get some experiences, and especially engineering and science, go get some experience working somewhere, and they'll come back for a PhD if they really want to take it to the next level. And typically in science and engineering, if you want to be in charge of the research direction, you need to have a graduate degree. Unless you have been with the company a long time, you work your way as up to engineer, senior engineer, up to director. But I had been a lab rat for a couple of years, doing the bidding of what PhD researchers told me to do. And I said, hey, well, I'd rather be in that position, and I'm not getting any younger. I got a 5 or 6 year delay on a lot of the folks who are at the same level of education as me. So I better just roll right into it while I got the momentum. And my dad had told me right when I was getting out that if you don't do education now, you're probably never going to do it. It's really hard to go back and start it again. So I just took the opportunity. I had some really great experience, had some really great references from my time at Santa Barbara that helped me get into grad school and subsequently earn a really prestigious fellowship.
Where are you now, and what are you working on?
Right, so just started my 5th year of my PhD in material science, working on solid oxide fuel cell materials. I don't actually make any devices. Solid oxide fuel cells are it's an electrochemical device where it's like a battery, except for it's not a closed system. You have a fuel, and there's electrochemical reactions to either produce electricity or use electricity to produce water and hydrogen. Those are two things you can make with them. And so I work on kind of optimizing fundamental properties of the solid electrolyte, kind of the part in between the electrodes. So it's the same architecture as a battery. You have electrodes and an electrolyte in between. So I work on kind of the fundamental characterization of that single part of a fuel cell.
How has your military background and experience prepared you for academics? And do you think that that's generally going to be true of lots of veterans?
Oh yeah. Just like I made a lot of friends in the military and I kept those bonds, the same applies for with meeting student veterans at university and in grad school. For bachelor's in grad school. I was involved in student veterans organizations both times. And from my experience, for the most part, they all do very well in school. Most of them usually aren't the smartest in their classes, getting the best grades, but they sure work probably the hardest. A lot of them start at basic algebra, have to work all the way up. They didn't do any AP classes in high school. So they took the work ethic they learned in the military and, you know, kind of embracing the suck, we call it, like you're stuck doing something you're not that comfortable with, you're not that good at, but get better at it. And so I think determination and discipline, sense of responsibility, you leave the military, you've been looking out for yourself for the most part. You don't have your parents helping you, you're responsible for yourself. And so that kind of really prepares you well to handle the adversity of university, where you're responsible for everything for your future.
You mentioned earlier using the GI Bill to help with your studies. How has the GI Bill enabled you to do what you're doing now?
Without the GI Bill, I would have never gone to college. I'm not huge on collecting debt. So it pretty much convinced me to go to college. I was like, I have to take advantage of this. It's the greatest benefit to veterans. It really amazes me some veterans don't take advantage of it, but you know, sometimes you don't need it. You can have successful careers doing trades and stuff that you don't need an education for. But because I was really into science and engineering, I know I had to get the credentials, and the GI Bill 100% made that a possibility. I wouldn't be here without it, guaranteed.
What has your experience been like in Golden, in Colorado, at the School of Mines as a veteran and as someone trying to reintegrate into your community as a civilian?
Right. So, well, I love Colorado. As soon as I showed up here, I loved it. I love the weather. I don't like humidity. I don't like hot weather. It's perfect. And everyone's super friendly. Everyone's super active. I have tons of friends that run, bike, swim, mountain bike. Everyone's always doing something here, and that's awesome. As far as reintegrating, I mean, it's been a decade since I got out. So by the time I got here, I was kind of already a civilian. Let's see, I got here in 2017. So yeah, it'd been 6 years. But if I were to go back to San Diego, the reintegration part was more of a culture shock there, where you had to set up certain rules for yourself versus the military setting rules for yourself. Like, all right, don't go get drunk every night and be irresponsible, stuff like that. You got to maintain discipline and, you know, work on yourself. But reintegration into civilian life, I felt wasn't too difficult, possibly because I didn't have some of the, you know, more extreme events happen to me during my service. Like I have a lot of friends who are Army Rangers, and they have a little more difficulty relating to like an average civilian. Some of them can lose their cool and go off on people very easily. I've always been a really calm guy, so that might also have something to do with it. But I do know a lot of veterans that have anger management issues. So that can kind of be off-putting when you're trying to mingle with other students.
You've worked a lot, both in California and here at the School of Mines, as a student, as a veteran, to lead and try and develop better pathways for those veterans. Can you talk about some of those?
Right. Yeah. So 2017, I got to Mines, and that was spring. And this semester before that, some of the student veterans had started to kind of form a group. And during that school year, we made it official and turned it into the Student Veterans Organization, what we call it the Mines Veterans Alliance, but it's a sub-chapter of Student Veterans of America. And so there wasn't any kind of knowledge within the administration on veterans issues. There had historically not been a huge veteran population at Mines. So over the last couple of years, we've really kind of built from the ground up network within the administration to handle veterans issues much more efficiently and effectively. So the process for using your benefits is much more improved. It's kind of a real pain to deal with the VA. There's tons of paperwork, tons of requirements. Yeah, so back to Veterans at Mines. The Dean of Students, Derek Morgan, has been a huge advocate of improving veteran services. And so we actually, over the last few years, has been a group of folks from CASA, Registrar's Office, financial aid, disability services. There's one point of contact kind of in all the wings of the university that have now become more knowledgeable about veterans issues. And so I'd say it's a pretty good place for veterans to come to. Now it's much easier and more approachable than it had been in the past.
What do you think young people who are considering entering the military, either out of high school like you did, or maybe they've graduated high school and they're looking for something to do, what do you think that they need to know about going into the military before they do it?
I think you need to go without any kind of preconceived notions of what it will be like. I think it's going to be unique for every individual. It's going to be a transformational process for everybody in some way or another, but it's not the same for everybody. It depends where you came from. Do you already have a good sense of discipline? Do you follow orders well? So a lot of people struggle with that if you came from a very undisciplined family structure or background. I knew some folks in basic training who actually ran away. They like escaped. And I don't know if he ever got caught, but he couldn't handle it. Yeah, so my advice to the younger generations considering the military is, if you already don't have kind of all the steps and boxes checked to be really successful in college, I highly suggest it. It can only help you and teach you discipline, responsibility. And it's only either 2, 4, 6 years. By the time you get out, you're still a young person, but you'll have a lot of life skills that people of the same age maybe haven't developed yet. So I've spoke at Arvada High School, on our Arvada High School panel for some students who are like trying to figure out what to do after they graduate. And I definitely emphasize the military as an option. A lot of people can't afford college. And I say, hey, if you don't want to take out a bunch of student loans, the government will pay for it. That's what I did. It worked out great. So I'm probably the biggest GI Bill salesman you'll ever meet. I tell everybody to use it. I still even have friends that have been out for 10 years and I say, hey, you should go use your GI Bill.
Why STEM for you, and why STEM for veterans? And can you talk about some of the work that you've done to help network in that area? Right.
So to be an effective scientist, you have to be rigorous, you have to be a good communicator, and you have to have great attention to detail. So one thing I learned from my job in the military, and it probably applies to a lot of other jobs, is attention to detail is really important. A small mistake can cost lives. Maybe not so much in STEM, but a small mistake can translate into the scientific community and cause a lot of people to waste time, waste money. And so I think veterans in STEM can really help our country, who's actually not the leader in technological advancement, probably for the next century versus the last century. But I worked with a professor, Seth Rahman. He works in the metallurgical materials engineering department as professor, but he also works in the vice president of research and technology transfers office. And so he came to Mines from DOE, and he had this idea for many years that there's a lot of aging engineers and technicians in the national lab system. There's national labs all over the country, and a lot of them, you know, have been there 20, 30, 40 years, and they're aging out. And as you know, the federal government doesn't pay as much as the private sector for scientists and engineers, so they have a lot harder time recruiting people. So we kind of put together this event called Vets to STEM, where all the national labs kind of had a big recruiting event for veterans studying STEM degrees to try and recruit veterans into the national lab system, because they've already proven that they kind of have a sense of responsibility to serve their country, a sense of pride in serving their country. And they don't necessarily need to make the most money. And so it's probably easier to recruit smart people who already have that kind of sense of pride in serving their country.
Question I had asked you earlier that I think you had an interesting perspective on. What do you think the civilian population should better understand about the veteran experience, about the function of the military, about the operations of the military, just in general?
Right. I'll start with a story. In undergrad in Santa Barbara, I was talking about veterans things with a fellow veteran, and a student walked by and said, "What's a veteran?" I was blown away that like just the name veteran, people didn't know what that was. I think a lot of people are disconnected from what the military does, and they think, oh, that's just some small fraction of the country, but it, you know, it's millions of people. You know, people are still joining all the time and still getting out all the time, and they're I think it's kind of underappreciated what kind of benefits they bring to society. You know, they're always going to help out their neighbors, their friends, reliable people in general, at least from my experience. And I don't think civilians should look down upon them for wanting to serve the country. You know, there's a very small percentage of veterans who might have been psychopaths and wanted to just kill people, but I think it's not like Rambo. Most veterans are just normal people who want to do their job, get some help with college. And I think because, you know, the highest levels of government want to be involved in conflicts overseas, that doesn't mean everyone who joins the military supports that and wants to be a part of it. Sometimes that's just the option they chose as a job, and they're just doing their part. Pride in your country. But I think even if you disagree with the high level decisions that the government makes in terms of overseas conflicts, I think you should still support the people who are serving in the military.